Hello, 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 and welcome to an episode of Deliberately Woke.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see you, my friend.
Yes, good to see you and talk about some interesting topics all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what we do.
yeah. No, so this topic is really interesting. I mean, we've been discussing this and how to talk about it because it's a weird concept, but this concept of this perpetual state of scarcity
Hmm.
that exists, and we hear these terms a lot with economics, right? And like, the economic systems and scarcity and resources and all this and who acquires them. But we were thinking about this from more of a sociology or anthropological approach on how scarcity plays into race and how kind of like how I mean, at least my definition is how
Hmm.
historical events can create this sense of scarcity
Hmm.
that perpetuates violence and perpetuates, you know, just bad things happening to people. So that's really what this is the topic we want to talk
Yeah.
about today. And like we have different variations and examples of what this is. But I wanted to know what your definition of this meant or what this means to you, this term, and how it plays into race relations happening in the US and globally and whiteness and anti-blackness and all these things, but
Hmm.
how this concept plays like how you see it playing into this field.
Hmm. Well, I think that a scarcity mindset is this idea that you never have enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it comes out of actually like the experience of not having enough. I think that there are environmental factors that play into this, whether, where you live there it's not fertile land, you can't grow food, or maybe you're far from water.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's really cold. Maybe it's hard to build a shelter that
Mm-hmm.
supports you. Or you have to be in this mindset of fighting, and fighting just to survive. And I think that this has kind of like followed people, or like this mindset stays with people over a certain period of time. And I would say that actually I think that it has created the idea of race in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and differences amongst people in order to fight for resources, or to justify why you're taking
Mm-hmm.
resources from a group of people. Even, and I think it goes so far as like, even if it's like a real fight in the beginning, like eventually you don't need to keep fighting for resources if you acquire certain things, but it just
Mm-hmm.
turns into to hoarding. It turns to greed, and that in turn affects how we view each other, the different classifications that we have, how we, you know, feel comfortable with certain people being poor, or
Mm-hmm.
certain people being
Yeah.
rich. Like these perceived differences come out of this
Or
scarcity
who's
mindset.
worthy of it.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
what's
Mm-hmm.
is something that's really significant with this is who's worthy of making money, who's worthy of being rich and having resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I agree with you. I think it is this perpetual state of not having enough or
Mm-hmm.
acquiring enough, and like just an abundance of everything, like
Well, it's not
greed.
real abundance, right? It's like, because if you had an abundant mindset, then you would not
No,
act in
like
a certain way. They want
they want
as much
everything,
as
and it's
possible.
never
Uh-huh.
enough. But it is
Mm.
abundant. It's excessive, and it's like
Mm.
cancer.
Mm.
It's cancer. Like you can't,
Mm.
like cancer grows and it kills the organism that
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
growing in. But in this world that we live in, capitalism teaches that constant growth is a good thing,
Yeah.
and it's not. But I think, like, I also think that this state of scarcity that people live in, I think, is also has to do with like history
Yeah.
and like experience that people have. And like I always mention like European Western European history being very violent and brutal and dark, and yet it's very sugar coated for us and about kings and palaces and these things. But it's a very dark history. It's about acquiring people, acquiring land, and
Mm-hmm.
killing someone and declaring yourself king, and if
Yeah.
anyone defined you, you're going to kill them and
Yeah.
murder and rape their women. Like it's that I think plays into this. And I think it kind of it breeds this state of scarcity, and also capitalism rewards this state of scarcity, right? Because it's all about rewarding, the scarcity mindset and aggression and greed and exploitation. Because the more you have, the more you're going to, the better off you are, because the world is in a perpetual state of scarcity.
Yeah.
So I think it plays into that historical context. I always say I find it very fascinating that Western Europeans go exploring. They call it the age of exploration. As if people didn't live in these places before they found it. It wasn't explored before, as if the native people just were sitting there twiddling their thumbs and
I mean, it's insane.
It's like very weird. But I think that it takes a specific type of person, and I think a specific type of kind of like when they talk about generational trauma that you experience, right? I think like,
stays with you.
But I think Western Europeans, it's not. I don't know if it's trauma, but because of the lives they lived, like from ancient Rome falling apart to the Dark Ages, to all these things, I think they have lived in this state for a very long time. And I think that's what made them so violent, with which I call the age of colonization. I don't call it, or the age of exploitation. I don't call it exploration, because they didn't find anything.
Yeah.
It wasn't founded by them. This was places that had people that had lived there for thousands of years, that had language, that had culture, that had civilizations, some even better than Western civilizations. Some of them had plumbing that Western civilization didn't have.
Right.
Like all these things.
Throwing shit out the window.
Exactly. Or like diseases, things that just, and also this consciousness of you're a human being, but you're part of
a larger picture.
Of an earth ecosystem and Mother Nature, which I find very fascinating. And I find that very telling of the European people, that you find a place. I just don't see myself doing that. If I go to a place that I have never been, or that's new,
it's mine now.
And it's mine now. I'm going to kill all you, and it's mine, and now that's it.
That's the thing. It's not just about, I want. It's that you can't have. And if you have, then it's almost an affront to me, or I need to take that from you, because they need to have everything. And that's that's a broad statement, but
yeah,
for the purpose of what we're talking about at this moment. But yeah, I mean, it does come from a place of fear, which.
But where that fear comes from is what I'm curious about.
I think it comes from. I think it comes from historically, like an environment, and then it's I think it's a physical environment and like lived experiences, and then, just eventually dealing with it the wrong way, and people who don't even benefit from acting like that, adopting that with the creation of whiteness, which comes from this scarcity mindset too.
Yeah.
So you could pit people against each other and continue to acquire at the top,
But that's how racism plays into capitalism, is because you distract people enough and you're able to steal all the natural resources. It happens all the time, all over the world, with, these Western powers are interested in some resource, right? And they go there and they fuck shit up.
Yeah.
Because they want it.
Well, it's to exploit it too. It's not even just we need this. It's never just a need.
No, it's not need.
It's not.
It's just power and wanting the resource, the natural resource, which again, they've created an economic system that benefits their mindset. Like it benefits them. That's why so many people are exploited.
But does it really? I think that there's also like a conversation to have about like, what is it that they're trying to acquire? What is power? How do we define what power is? Like there's
what they have. I mean, what they have with the narratives, they tell us what we can do, what we can't do, what is civilized about our culture, what is not civilized, what religion to follow. I mean, they've told us all these things. But it doesn't
apply to them. So.
It doesn't apply to them, but they're the overseers of all of this. And that's the power they want. And they still have that power. They still have that power when, wherever you go globally, the elite always have allegiance to Europe or the US and anywhere you go in the world. And that's the power they have. That's how they're able to. I mean, a continent like Europe, so small, is able to control the world in the U.S. Like the Western world controls the world, and they're able to do this because they have us all buying into this system that they've created and manufactured this system that benefits them, and pins us against ourselves to be more white or to be more acceptable. Maybe not even white, but to be more acceptable in their, categories of what it is to be whatever. But they create these narratives. That's powerful in itself, the narrative they create for us. Like what we can do, what we can't do, what is, what is a civilized society, what is not, what religion is acceptable, what religion is not. That's plays out all the time in Latin America. You have all these, mixed religions with like African religions and Catholicism.
They're demonized.
And they're like, oh my God, these people are like, and it's like, this is a religion. These are people you created kind of through colonialization. You've created other ethnic groups because people mixed and people took from other cultures.
Or even kept their own
traditions and adapted them to the new environment they were in, and you've created these other ethnic groups, and that's something else. But you are in power because you create narratives on what ethnic group is acceptable, what look is acceptable, what music, what sound, language, like how many
all in an attempt to like preserve themselves.
But also how many European countries that speak a language and have a former colony that speaks the language criticize the accent or the dialect or certain words that you pronounce. Everyone, French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, all of them
colonized.
They all do. And like, I mean,
it's a thing too, to also when you're in different countries to be able to sound exactly like them or speak properly like.
Or when you go to their country and they're like criticizing you when you're a speaker of the language, but it's a different accent because you're not European.
I love when people ask you how you could know, like, how do you know French? I must know you're not white. How is this? How is this?
Did you do a semester in Paris?
Yeah. What is the explanation for this? There's no. Yeah. Well. Here. Fucking people did this. That's why.
Exactly. But I think like that's the power they have. They like power over the narratives and power over what limits we set and what we can do. And that's what I think. The systems they've manufactured all these systems to keep them in power, and that's what's being challenged now because people are not ashamed to be black. People are not ashamed to be native. In Latin America, this is a discussion. It's not as big as the U.S., but it's happening, and that's challenging their status quo. Because what happens when people are no longer ashamed to be black and indigenous and European?
Yeah, well then what? Yeah, what
are you going to say then?
What
are you going to say then? And that's that's the scary part now. That's happening all over the world, in other parts of the world as well. But people are no longer ashamed to be non-European.
Yeah, I mean that's why there's a rise. I think that can be attributed to. We could attribute this to the rise in authoritarianism all over the world.
Because they're about self-preservation and they only exist. And Europe and Eurocentric Western like dominance of the world only exists with racism.
Absolutely.
Once that's gone, they have no more leverage anymore. And once the global South realizes that they have the resources. Yes, the North has the economic institutions and the that stability and all those systems, but if once they realize that they have the resources and they're richer,
but
then
they've been richer.
They have always been, but once they realize that, that's what these white people are afraid of, and that's why totalitarianism and this, white, power all over the world is happening, and like even in European countries with Muslims coming and like other black people coming, like, oh, you're taking this is our land and we're proud, whatever. It's happening because once you break down that racism that keeps their system alive, it's over.
Yeah. Well, then we have to confront class.
Of course we do.
And economics.
Of course we do.
And
I think race is a big one.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it's the biggest one.
It's a fuel because it's something that we can see and discriminate against actively.
I think, I would love to see also they pin us against each other. on like who, who is better and who
Well,
is
who
not,
deserve like
and
we're talking about who deserves more.
who deserves the attention of white people thinking our culture
Yeah.
is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always use Latin America because that's what I studied, but also like countries like Argentina and southern Brazil that are Italian and German descent. Like this is what is proper or good,
Mm-hmm.
acceptable culture. But then Bolivia, which is like 95% indigenous, is like, oh my god, that's like disgusting. That's a
Yeah.
place that you should never go.
Mm.
And like things like that. But once we start breaking those things down, I think we're more powerful. And I think that understanding their history, and I think understanding at least Western Europeans, because that's what I'm talking about here is
Yeah.
Western European, because Europe obviously is very different, and I think the Eastern European experience is much
Totally different.
different. Especially they also have a higher population of Muslim. Like it's just very different than Western
Mm-hmm.
Europe, and a lot more civil wars, and then the Soviet Union. So like there's a lot more. It's different than Western Europe, but I do think understanding their psyche is understanding their history, which
Mm-hmm.
is very violent. And I don't think they teach us that, at least my education in this country
I mean, I
before
think it was
college,
just glossed over in
and
school.
very sugar coated as like
Yeah,
kings
absolutely.
and palaces. And then they came and founded this and like the
Mm-hmm.
explorers and all these things. But they don't talk about the violence of it and how atrocious it was what they did
Yeah, to each other too,
to each other. Yeah.
and then the mindset that creates, and
Yeah, and
like
the
was
and like
was
we've talked about before, that their sheer presence killed people.
I mean, it's
That's like
come to some
that's
place and people
that's
start
really deep.
dropping
That's
dead.
really deep. That
I
your
know.
sheer presence kills people.
It's
Like you just being somewhere killed people. That's wild. I mean, to me, that is
I
like
mean, I remember learning this in school and being like, wait, let's back up. The shit out the window and the bubonic plague. Okay. This is what I remember.
it's just wild. That to me has always been so like mind-boggling that their utter presence killed people, like a genocide, like literally killed.
Well, then, and then they actively went and killed
No, they
people here
actively did.
and
They
started
did.
wars. And then I love the way it's like depicted in our history books or
Yeah.
even in
Even the
the
Western
yeah.
expansion, they talk about it as if God told
Well, I
them
mean, it's even in the
to
preamble
go.
of our Constitution, like calling indigenous people savages. Like this is our law. This is what we stand for.
Exactly.
And I think there's also something to be said, about this scarcity mindset feeding into creating
Creating
capitalism,
it. Yeah.
and also this rejection of socialism, but in this country specifically because of the racist overtones that we have and the racist founding of this country.
Yeah.
The idea that certain people don't deserve to benefit from a system that
Yeah.
they fucking pay into.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I love when people compare this country to European countries, and I'm like, it's not the same. It's just not the same. I don't think that we're not going to get there in the same way at all because of the racism in this country. That's always what's going to divide us.
Yeah, because again, because the racism. It's interesting. It's like embedded here. I mean, it's embedded everywhere.
Yeah, but
But
it's very specific here. I mean, like you came, you fucking raped and killed,
I guess because this
and
country is built on slavery.
well,
And
yeah, that's what I'm
European
saying. Like
countries,
the way that this place is really like a lawless ass, crazy founding of like, okay, this is the new land. We think some of this is India too. So it's like dumbass people coming here.
mediocre,
Yeah,
white people,
beyond
rich.
mediocre people coming to explore. They didn't even know how to damn navigate. They didn't know
No,
if
they
they're
thought they
going.
were in fucking India.
Yeah, they thought they were going east, and meanwhile, now it's the West Indies because
Yeah.
I was mistaken. Excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, severely mistaken, like literally.
I mean, literally, I feel like
Like-
on the opposite end of
I
the
mean,
world.
literally, not even the same
I-
climate.
yeah.
Like, not even the same climate. Do not speak the same language. I mean, a complete fuck up. But again, they're rewarded for it. And I think the history component, I feel like they've created economic and political systems to kind of validate what they've done, right? So like colonialism came before capitalism, but I think to validate all the things they acquired, because European wealth does not exist without slavery and without colonialization, colonizing. I mean, the British fucking Empire colonized every fucking corner of the earth they could, and like, and I think because I think they are not the smartest, but they're insidious. Like they know
it's a long-term
they
plan.
know how to do stuff, and they created these systems of capitalism to like reward and say, oh, what we did wasn't bad. Like you don't hear anyone talking about this or paying these countries back for what they've stolen. I mean,
or even making my country, Haiti, pay back reparations for liberating themselves back to France.
But even that narrative, like there's a global anti-Haiti rhetoric all over the world.
Totally rooted in anti-blackness.
No matter what part of you are.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's because a country like Haiti and its history, you know, it kind of like defied what they've created, and that they were shocked. I mean, it was a rich French colony to then be completely revolted by slaves and taken over, and the French have to flee. It's like, I mean, that is something that they can never get over, which also shows how they're very petty. And it's even to this day talking about it, and how other countries like
the propaganda against Haiti.
Yeah, the same thing as the neighboring country, right? I mean, that exists very heavily there.
Absolutely.
And
neighboring attached, we are literally attached.
I mean, at one point it was called Española, but we're not going to go there. Just one side spoke French and one side spoke Spanish, and magically it's two different races. I don't know.
We don't know each other.
We don't know each other. There's a nice river that separates us, and, you know, you speak your French and leave us with our Spanish. Literally the same name.
Yeah.
Saint Dominique and Santo Domingo. It's literally the same name translated. And it's like, it's crazy.
It is.
But I think these are examples of like, I feel like they have been creating this world that we live in for 600 years. And that's how I feel. That's why I always think it's important to talk about their history. It's those narratives, though, that they're geniuses at this. They're geniuses at creating these narratives on what is right and what is acceptable and what we should be doing. And that is something that they have mastered that in every country. In Europe, too, they've mastered this, because Europeans, too, think that they get away with it and like, oh, America, it's so this and that. It's like, motherfucker, these are your ancestors.
Yeah,
these
I know.
are your
That's why it's
first
very
cousins.
hard for me. I can't understand.
This is your first cousin. So stop acting like you're like so superior to these.
What is wrong with
these Americans?
You all are quite crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't understand how anyone could think this way. I mean, I don't see color. I mean, there's black people that live where I live. I don't bother them.
Please.
Except they're very different from how we were raised.
Yeah.
And
that I always annoys me about Europeans, that they think that they're so far removed, and it's like, you're not.
Yeah.
I said, this is all literally your fault. Like, literally everything. You did this, and now you're like, oh, you know, you had war. It's kind of like World War II happened, and they had like a cleanse. They were like, oh,
it's not us.
You know what? We
crazy.
They blew up our capitals. You know what? We're done now.
We're not responsible. We absolve ourselves. If you want to keep doing this shit, go ahead. But we have nothing to do with it. But when we come there, we're going to benefit from it.
Exactly. And they benefit from it.
But it's okay. It's fine.
It's like so ridiculous. And that annoys me, that they think that they're so much more sophisticated.
And there's
racism
stuff. There. They're fucked up everywhere. It is you. It's you.
It's you. Exactly. And like, again, and stop removing yourself from Americans, because they are literally, especially the ones that are making all these decisions are directly your descendants. Yeah. Like directly. Like, they're not, it ain't me.
Yeah. I didn't do this.
When I'm in Europe, they're like, oh, sorry, American. I'm like,
oh no, I'm so sorry. It's like,
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm okay.
I'm Haitian. We saw.
You know, I'm from the Caribbean. I'm good. I don't get offended when you talk about Americans because
Me
I think
either.
they're
Also,
trash too.
yeah, I know. I'm black, and I'm not in this. I know who you're talking about, but it ain't
Yeah, it
me.
ain't me. But
I
I'm
do
like,
this.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, these Americans are. I'm like, hey, you're not offending me. I feel the same way.
They're crazy, right?
But it's just that stuff is just insane, and I think this is something that should be talked about from like a sociology and anthropology lens of
Yeah.
this state of scarcity, and I think understanding the white man's psyche, because I do think it's different than other ones. I think everyone has, like, depending on your history, you have a different psyche, but I do think this Western European psyche is different and has shaped the world because the power that they have.
wield, yeah.
And I think it's important for us to study it because I do think that their power and their influence has been monumental in the world. I mean, they have a huge impact on like human history. I mean, it's horrible to say, but it's true. I mean, it's so true. I mean, this country wouldn't exist without them.
As we know it, yeah.
You know,
As we know
and
it.
our concept of race, or what is, you know, genocide that have happened, Rwanda that happened in the 90s, is a direct response to them pinning people against each other for their phenotype. They almost killed a whole ethnic group because of racism, and we just brush it off. And the UN is like, oh, you know,
No,
we missed it.
Do they care?
They were like, yo, we missed this. We didn't know.
They're like,
We
all right,
we didn't know there was genocide happening.
A couple of less of
You
them
know,
is no problem
we
for me. I
didn't
don't
know.
care.
Yeah, we did not know what was going on.
And you know, we keep moving on.
In our mind, they all black.
Yeah. We don't see a problem with that. If they want to kill themselves, they can go ahead.
It's like, and like that was in the 90s. I mean, it's just, it's like, and it happens all the time in Latin America too, with indigenous populations still have no access to the government. Black people in Brazil, black people in Colombia fighting for rights and representation, and these people built these countries, and everything that you love of these countries is black.
Oh, of course. All parts of culture that people.
Like, it's just
Yeah.
like-
I just love the color. I love the music. I love the dance. I love the food. I love the people. Like this, all of this comes from
It's like,
Africa.
it's so crazy. And like me as a Caribbean person, and like just like the anti-blackness that exists from where I'm from. But then everything that we love is black, but we love that, but it's not black. It's like Spanish or some
Spanish.
crazy
That's
or
my
some
favorite
crazy
one. Calling
shit.
people Spanish.
Yeah,
that
we're all
aren't-
Spanish. But those are things that are fascinating. But I think understanding that, what we're talking about is, I think, understanding the Western white person. Because I think, unfortunately, we're brainwashed and like we're molded to live in their world. And this is their world. And that's just what it is.
They think of themselves as a standard.
And they have created a system, and
they have created a system where they are.
They are the standard, and that's why now it's challenging, and we're having like it's not like a civil war, like violent yet, but it is kind of like a cultural war.
Absolutely.
In
People
the
getting
sense,
very angry and
yeah,
you know, I saw a tweet. It was like, I should figure out who this is from, but somebody put out a tweet that was like, you know, it's crazy. You don't see any white men in movies or in commercials or, you know, in media anymore. And then somebody agreed and they were like, so you agree diversity and representation is important. It's like they're proving the points by becoming so agitated by not seeing themselves as the only people. But that's the difference, is like they're still being represented, but it's like it's not everything. And that's comes from this scarcity mindset of
they have to have
need
everything. It's everything or nothing.
There's no sharing, which feeds into the individualism, which feeds into, you know, which creates capitalism and steers
validates that validates
rewards-
that
reward-
greed and
yeah.
wanting everything, and it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing with all, like, everything in the system. Stock market, everything is about absolute. Everything's absolute. There's no in between. There's no rationality.
Yeah.
Like there's no they are literally going to kill the earth.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to kill the earth to make billions.
Well, they're moving to space. Didn't you know?
But I'm saying they're literally, I mean, it's irrational, illogical. We're going to kill, we need to breathe and drink water to survive.
I mean, it's irrational.
They're going to kill the
because
planet.
You would think that at least
for
you would want to preserve
currency.
your
currency.
future bloodline too, right? Like if you were.
No, they don't care. They don't care about future bloodline.
Yeah, well, the earth matters.
They only care about death tax, which is not a death tax. It's a state tax. So, but they call it a death. You're taxing me that I die. No, we're taxing your kids that are going to inherit your fucking billions. That's what we're taxing, which is legitimate to tax. I mean, hello. But like,
I earned my money. I need to keep all of it, and you can't have any of it, even though we're not exactly sure why it was decided that I should make this amount of money.
But also, why do these families have this wealth? Because I think that's an argument.
Oppression.
I also think that's something to talk about in this country. These legacy families, and I know that's very controversial and that's anti-capitalist. But like, why do these families have the right to have all this wealth when it was built on murder and violence and rape and God knows what else? Like, to me, they should all lose their wealth. I'm sorry.
No,
I think
agree.
this wealth
It's
should be
wrong.
reallocated, and it's not reallocated even if it's not reparations, but like build homes for people. The fact that there are homeless people and people that are starving in this country, kids that go to bed hungry, to me doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that Bezos made $90 billion during a fucking pandemic when how many fucking people lost mothers, their whole fucking family to this shit. Right? And here we are like, praising these billionaires as if they're gods and they're fixing it.
Because we're trained to, though.
Because even if you're not,
even if you're not getting anything, you're trained to think that this is what I should aspire to.
Of course.
If I just do this, then I'll get there and I'll be like these people who have everything. It's all fucked because even that everything, like having all the money in the world, clearly they still live in this mindset where they have to acquire everything or take everything from other people. So what do they really have? That goes back to how we define what power is and what are like.
Well, they define it. The same thing as what makes sense because
but do they? I mean, like
they define it. Because it's like it's also the same thing as like why indigenous practices or African practices are not respected. Right? Or how like indigenous people before we had fucking climate change, right? They saw themselves as part of this earth and they used everything. They weren't wasteful. You white Europeans have always been wasteful and all about themselves and about acquiring and breaking down trees to build their homes. Like that is a different mindset. And that's a different thing. How would the world look if the white people never came to this side of the world? If they never colonized Africa, how would this world be? Would we be living in this climate change era?
Probably not.
You will be living in this world where poverty exists, where all this violence exists, murder. I mean, so much that they have created, and
it all comes from this mindset, though.
Yeah,
it all
does.
Comes from this.
But it's also not. There's no accountability. We just move on.
Well, because they're the ones making the system. Of course, there can't be accountability because then they would lose their power, and everything would be broken from there. People would be forced to question why we're following this.
I just want to fuck it all up and break it.
I know, fuck it all.
But I
agree.
mean. But what? So my next question then, like, why does this matter? Like, what is the importance of this or being aware of this? Because I do think there is an awareness, and I would like people, especially Americans, because I don't know how history is taught in Europe. I do know how it's taught a little bit in Latin America, and it's even worse than here. At least, like, conquest and colonization is taught very poorly there. But I guess what I would love people to do is like review history, Americans, review the history they've been taught and really take a racial lens to it and think about this scarcity model and think about like what has happened to the Western European to do this, to come to a new land and kill everyone and take over. Or, and capitalism, how that came. Because also in the textbooks, it's talk about in this great thing and it opened opportunity.
Exploring,
and it's like, but really, like really being analytical, I think is really where we need to be as Americans now. Analytical, because everything that they've taught us is propaganda. And was part of the American, like, keeping America alive and its its survival is based on this propaganda of
Mm-hmm.
American dream and this country being exceptional. And while I do think this country has great things, I don't think this country is exceptional. Yeah. So I would just tell people to just be analytical about like what you see,
Mm-hmm.
and like, look at things. Not everything has to be racialized, but in this country everything is. So I would just say when
Yeah,
you're
I mean, I
seeing
think that that's
things,
like a point where we have to come to accept.
yeah, I think it's important to just be analytical about it and just see, and don't, and everything's not always as it is or as it's seen, and that things that are perpetuated or said to us are not always like that, and always think about who the audience is or what they're trying to convey from this. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that would get people more aware of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us for another episode.